What's going on, everybody? My name is Sean O'Brien, and this is episode 3 of MakerHUB, podcast focused on innovation, entrepreneurship, and design thinking. And I'm here today with a very special guest and one that I have met in a very unique way. And this is actually the first day that we're meeting from Instagram. So I was introduced to him from a friend that I graduated with in high school, and I shot him a DM, and we've been talking for the past 6 to 8 months. And watching your progress has been very interesting, and I'm really excited to have you here because one of the things that certainly isn't taught from a fundamental sense, and that is number one, self-love, and number two, really kind of understanding what your end goal is and kind of navigating that path of what do I do next, how do I handle certain situations, and I think you've done a good job of kind of grasping as a whole, really taking control of your mind and really kind of understanding what you want to happen next. And I just kind of want you to give a real quick, who is Andre Wyze?
Well, first off, thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it. I'm always humbled when people ask me for my input on these topics because it's my life's mission to, help people find their way. I am a poet. That's how it really all started. I'm a born storyteller. I run a media company called Humble Genius. It acts as an educational platform that helps people turn passions into value. And currently, we're shooting a documentary series on what it means to love yourself.
So, first question, and this is kind of a roundtable general question, but what are you right now obsessed with? You're up at 2:30. You're staring at the ceiling. Can't sleep. What are you thinking about?
I'm thinking about visuals. I think videos are the hieroglyphs of our generation, and the internet is the wall. And so pictures and videos act as like what's going to last forever, and the best hieroglyphs will be visited later. So I'm always thinking about how can I tell a story in a way that doesn't need me to present it for it to exist and thrive in the world forever.
Mm-hmm. So that's very interesting, and it's a concept that is definitely applicable to a lot of us, but we don't really conceptualize in a very particular way. So next question is, and our primary audience is engineers and those in STEM, and I think this is a very important kind of overall topic because we're so focused and driven on the numbers and on the data, and we don't stop to think about how we can kind of control ourselves. And you talk at Andre Wyze, AndreWyze on Instagram, and he has a lot of in-car rants, which I love. And one of the things we were just talking about is that a lot of your Instagram posts, or all of your Instagram posts, are really directed back at yourself, and it's kind of a self-reflection every time you go out and you do post these rants, if you will, on Instagram. So if you can kind of, what's your favorite kind of rant that you've made, and what does that mean to the people you're trying to reach with Humble Genius?
I don't know that I per se have a favorite rant. I think I've used social media, especially as of late. I think it's interesting if you think about it. 100 years ago, you couldn't look back and see yourself. And so really, it's like a spot check for me where I can look back, I can see where I was, I can see what I was saying, and I can work on myself by seeing myself. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes I'm literally just I'm always just spitballing my thoughts. And it will come from, it might be a friend that I spoke to, it may be a DM that I get where somebody's struggling with an issue or a problem. 9 times out of 10, it's just me, and that's the problem that I encountered that day. Mm-hmm. And so what I try to do is I try to solve my own problems on the spot. Or at the very least, I realize that life is a continuous circle. So I'll probably come back to this problem later on, and 9 times out of 10, I'll forget how I addressed it. So let me leave a spot check or a marker. I just want people to be aware, and I think that's always the common theme of what I'm talking about. And I think we go through life blindly often because there's so many external factors, whether it be your mother, your father, the job, the school, and there are so many standards on what you should do, so many, like I said, external factors trying to trigger you into a certain direction that we rarely get an opportunity to cut out the noise and say, what do I want? Mm-hmm. And so I really just want people to think about what they want who they are and who and what that person can do for the world.
So what does that process really look like? With all these external forces pulling in all opposite directions, how do you cut out the noise? And what is the first step of really taking, yourself into consideration?
It's uncomfortable, but seclusion. You have to be by yourself with no external anything. I often have my phone on either airplane mode or do not disturb. My friends get upset because I don't text back in time, but it takes like 7 minutes. This is a fact. It takes 7 minutes for your mind to recalibrate to a thought once it's broken.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're dead set on something and somebody disturbs it, it's going to be, and that's like on average.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be 10 to 15 minutes before you get back to the spot that you were. Now, I don't know about you, but it's important to me to have a direction and know where I'm going. And so breaking that, especially when trying to figure out what you want to do with the rest of your life,
right?
It's like text or figure out my life. And it kind of it just weighs itself out. And so for me, sitting back to myself and just listening to my own thoughts. Because if you start listening to what you're thinking, you'll start to you can trace back where those thoughts came from. It might be your mom, it might be a TV show, it might be a radio show. You may not get all the way back to the end of the rainbow, we'll call it, but you end up just being able to only hear what you're thinking. And that may not be peaceful, but at the very least, there are no other voices around. So I think being alone is something that a lot of people don't, I won't say master, but they never get comfortable with. And it's something that I was forced to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was forced to see the value of it. And so now, although it is very uncomfortable to be alone, to be secluded, I can see the value in it.
Yeah. And I think that plays into the fact that the people you surround yourself with have a major impact in kind of what you do on a daily basis. And what has your experience been over the course of the past, 5 years, say, of the people you've been surrounded by and how that has changed and how the outcome has changed?
When I accepted a lot of excuses inside of myself, I accepted a lot of excuses from the people around me. And so when people would make excuses for themselves, I would agree, oh, I understand. Because I understood within what my excuse was. And because I was accepting a lower version of myself, it was easier to accept a lesser version of the people around me.
Mm-hmm.
As time has gone forward, when I hear excuses, it triggers me. Because I know that you're literally putting up a wall to the person you could be or the place that you could go.
Mm-hmm.
And you're making a choice, a conscious choice to say, this is in my way.
Right.
I like to say that when you have a brick wall, you have a few options. You can go through it, you can go over it, or you can go around it.
Mm-hmm.
None of what I said says stop, look at the wall, and say, damn, guess that's that.
Right.
It's not an option.
Right.
And so in my mind, when I hear that from other people around me, I can't say I cut people off, but when I hear that, when I see you hit 5 brick walls and it's always
right.
Guess there's nothing I can do, I just can't be surrounded by you. And over time, those people, they remove themselves. Because when you stop accepting excuses from yourself, and you start saying I acknowledge my weaknesses, I acknowledge the things that are in my way so that they don't hinder me. And when you do that, you make the people around you very uncomfortable because they know they have to start doing it for themselves. And it relieves my conscience because when I correct them on their excuses, I don't feel bad anymore.
Right.
Because I hold the same standard for myself.
Right.
And so I've realized that I have a lot less friends, but the friends that I have now are equally as serious about momentum and progression as I am.
Right. Right. Yeah. The other night, actually, I was looking through my phone. I just had kind of a thought on my mind, and I was like, I think this would be really beneficial for a lot of people to share it with. And I started scrolling through my contacts, and I'm like, wow. I'm like, the people that I really care about, that list is getting very small. And I started to think about, what does that mean? What does that really mean to me? And I'm like, that's not at all a bad thing. And I started to look at the people that I really do care about, and I'm like I'm starting to see this trend that they have this quality that they all possess, and it all is starting to make sense. And it's really funny to see it come full circle, and it's exciting to see that circle that I surround myself. I mean, look at our relationship, right? It's crazy to me that we both saw something in each other that was all right, I should probably keep this guy on my radar, right? We never really expressed any of that. It was just understood.
Absolutely.
What this person is doing and what this other person is doing, we could really make some things happen over time, and just making that relationship happen, which I think is exciting, and I think is important to just put yourself out there. So when did you start? I've been watching you over the past 6 to 7 months, but when did you really start just kind of putting it all out? Not only Instagram, but just social media in general, or like when did this Humble Genius movement really start?
Humble Genius began in like 2014 out of, I'll say, necessity for freedom. I wanted mental freedom. I had so many people, like I said, telling me what to think, what to do. There were my parents. There were different jobs that I had. I was just tired of doing what people were telling me to do. Not because I have trouble following direction, but I did at the time. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to do something that spoke to my heart, though. You know what I'm saying? Like, I wanted to feel something from what I was doing. I rarely felt anything. Mm-hmm. And so I was working overnight at a group home. I was driving 68 miles to and from. So like 100 and, whatever miles. Right. And
136.
There it is, Excuse me, my brain. So I was driving there, and in the morning I get off at 7:00, 7:30, and I had to fight 476 traffic. Now, if you know 476, there's not a moment in time where 476 is less than a headache. Mm-hmm. And so, especially at 8:00 in the morning, where people are going to work, and I was having trouble staying motivated. I was having trouble staying positive, and half the time staying awake. And I needed something, and I think I had to go to traffic court one day, and I just had this book in my car, and it was called The Secret, The Law of Attraction. I sat and I read like 5 pages of it, and I was like, I get it, ding, just be positive. Mm-hmm. And I did it like sarcastically, like I was like, I'm gonna just fake the funk. And so literally when everything went wrong, I just started being positive. Like sarcastically, but ironically it started working. And great things started happening. I started to be able to see the light in different situations, no matter what. And I was like, man, this thing really works. Maybe I'll just start posting these messages up. And, Instagram was, it was already like on its incline back in like 2014, and like people were jumping on. And so I just started posting the messages up. And after a while I was getting DMs and text messages, and I was just like, I started to realize the social responsibility that came with using a platform for positivity and love. And it just went from there. And then one day I just said the words Humble Genius together, and I was like, the freaking light bulb went off. And I don't know, man, it just stuck like glue ever since. And I'm a poet, so I started out doing poetry shows and things like that, because that's all I knew. Poetry shows and t-shirts. And so I just printed t-shirts. They're like my first batch, so like 70 in 9 days. Mm-hmm. And then was doing the poetry shows, and that was acquiring an audience too. And then later on, I got my own way again. I started doubting myself. I started saying it wasn't enough. I felt like I was plateauing. So I stopped. And, on this journey, that's happened to me about 4 or 5 times, to the point where, not that I accept it, but I don't know, I've stopped beating myself up for it. But that positivity is really what got me started, because I saw the trickery and wow, it's working.
Yeah. And it's crazy. Like for me, what's really helped me over the past, couple months and the past year especially is, I started a co-op at Nissan in Detroit. So I was thrown in Detroit in a hotel room for 4 months, and I'm sitting there the first week, and I'm like, I know no one. I no idea what's really going on around me, other than I have to work on Monday, and I hope it goes well, right? So I came across actually a Gary Vee post on Instagram, and this dude's like yelling at me, and I'm like, what the, like, what is going on right now? And then it was a positivity rant, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I really started to analyze like my outlook on a lot of things, and it really wasn't positive. And then as I started moving through this co-op and like looking at the people around me, because at this big organization, there's a very strong trend of the 40 to 50-year-old man or woman engineer who's just like complacent, has kids, has a husband or wife that they like are angry with, and they're just like not happy. And it's like what's the alternative? That's what I've really started to ask myself. Or what? Right? So like I fail a test, I have something happen to me, I spill coffee down my shirt, all these micro like negative things. And it's like, or what? And then you're like, well, or like, and then you start to think like, how can I even think about these things in a negative light when I can't do anything about them? So, what has been your kind of trigger that really kind of made you realize these things? And you said it as partly that book in the car, but to keep that positive mentality sustainable, what has been the driving force behind that?
People that care and knowing the better side of myself that exists. I've seen flashes of me at my best. I've yet to be able to string along a nice amount of time of seeing the best version of me, which is my current mission. Between my younger brothers, who, man, I love them dearly. My brothers remind me that somebody's looking up to me, no matter what. It's my family, my blood. I love them to death. And then also, there's that or what thing. It was very similar for me. What am I going to do if I quit? Am I going to just like wallow away and pout? I know what happens when you go down that road. There's poverty, there's drug addiction, there's depression. There's a multitude of ways.
Right.
What I'm unsure of is what happens when I push the other way.
Right.
And so if I'm sure of what happens that way, and every time I'm unsure and pursue anyway, amazing things happen, why not go forward?
Right.
Why not, in the space of all this darkness, just push through with the sheer assuredness that things are going to be better, and the knowledge that it's like a car, right? If you're driving in a car with somebody and all of a sudden they open the driver door and jump out, they just jump out,
right,
and they're rolling down the highway, right, and the car's still going. Do you grab the wheel or not? You don't think whether or not it's a bright idea to grab the wheel. You grab the wheel,
right,
because otherwise you know what's going to happen. There's a possibility that if you grab the wheel, you could hit a pothole and something bad could happen. However, the likelihood of something good happening, far more likely if you grab the wheel.
Right.
And I look at life the very same way. Everything is always going wrong for me. The people that I've cared about, I feel like essentially jump out of the car.
Right.
And it's always up to me to grab the wheel. And whenever I do, magic happens.
Right.
Whether I have doubt, no matter how much time passes in between me having control or not, as soon as I grab that wheel, I want to have something to focus on. Number two, there's the feeling of responsibility, of the acknowledgement of like, man, I took control and I made better of that situation. Even if I got to jam on the brakes and slam my forehead on the front dash, like that's better than running off the road and running into a light pole or something else, you know what I mean? But just, that I just think it's better to have control than to wish for control.
Right. And I think a lot of people also get caught up in once you have control and you screw up and you make a mistake and you kind of go down a path that you didn't expect to, people get caught up in what other people are thinking in that moment. And I think people really need to take a step back and always look at the macro, because the macro, for example, look at Bitcoin, right? People have these like idealistic, I hope this thing goes to 100K, like you just gotta like look at the macro, like what has been happening, and then January hits, the thing drops 50%, and everyone's like, oh my god, and you look at the macro, and this same trend happened 2 years ago, and like how can you be surprised by these things when literally history is telling you the story? So how do you tell people, or how do you explain to people that micro setback is not as important as you think it is in this direct moment? How do you explain that?
History always repeats itself. You just gave a prime example. I like to give the example to people sometimes of like a video game. You don't get to the end of a board, mess up, and then get to go to the next one. You have to start over from the beginning. But what happens? You remember, man, I fell here. It went wrong here. I lost it right here. Now you remember those lessons that you learned at the beginning. You're like, I did pretty well here, so let me remember how I did well here. This is where I messed up. and you get hyper focused on that one moment. But you got to get to it first. And so you know how like you could be playing a video game, and because you're so focused on that one spot where you mess up somewhere else. Because you forget the lessons that you learned in this period. Instead of realizing like, man, I made it that far because I was focused up until that point. So it's like putting that same focus that you're going to put on that failure into the points that you had already made it, because you got to repeat anyway. And then when you get there, you can zero in on where you lost it before. And so I think taking failures as lessons rather than just saying you failed.
Right.
It's like just replacing the word. It helps.
Right.
Hey, this is my lesson. I don't like to say fail. The word failure makes me feel uncomfortable because failure, I don't know, it sounds like there's no redemption from that. It sounds like an end point. It sounds sad.
Right.
Lesson sounds like comeback. Sounds like underdog. Sounds like I got you next time. And understanding that every single person who's ever won anything has failed more times than you can imagine. It's the reason why they're such good winners. Because they failed over and over and over again. So they had opportunity to be focus, fail, focus, fail, focus, fail, focus, fail. And then they sit back for a second and say, what's the lesson? I see that I did well here. What do I need to work on? And so I think where you fail at or where you lose footing, let's call it, it shows you where your weaknesses are. It shows you where the edge is. And so at that point, you can figure out exactly what's necessary to focus on.
So over the past, you've been at this, like I said, for a while. So what was your biggest win that you think you've accomplished? The biggest, whether it's a person that has DM'd you, texted you, or just that you found you're like, this whole thing makes sense. When did that hit you?
It hit me when I was in California. So I went to California. I took a one-way flight, had $100 in my pocket. And I was there for 3 months. Only recently have I realized that what I'd done was immensely irresponsible and probably not the brightest idea. But I mean, sometimes naivety is what gets you to those magical moments. It's not knowing that you can fail or not even thinking about it, or knowing it and saying, try it out anyway. Flying to California was gut-wrenching. And, it's a long story to tell, so I won't go like super in detail because I'm planning to like do a short film about it and things like that. But man, the people that I met, the complete strangers that embraced me, the fact that I didn't know anybody out there, couch surfed for 3 months, didn't spend one night on the street, ate at least once a day. It was just amazing. I ended up working for Baron Davis and meeting Ice Cube and Allen Iverson and T.O. and I worked a celebrity basketball game. Ended up partnering with this cool media company, GoldNet Basketball. They just gave me a place to live for a while at the tail end. So many amazing things happened that I realized what my limits weren't, and I realized how to love myself. I realized that I wasn't unconditionally loving myself, and that was a win for me because I got free. It didn't mean that I would never feel the fear of failure or that I would never get in my own way again, but it was a realization of my capabilities, of realizing that I had no ceiling. And like I said, it got me free. It got me to a point where I felt that my duty was to empower people in the same way. Not that I'm a guru of self-love. It's not that I'm a guru of how to, take a leap and survive, so much so that I just felt that I could. And sometimes that's literally all it takes is just the thought that you can. And so I realized the power of belief in self. And that, to me, was the biggest win because it got me to the other wins.
Right.
The foundation.
So the primary purpose of your trip to California was just to see what could happen.
The trip's purpose was to put the old me versus the new me. And just with no home field advantage to see who won. I tell people I left Bruce Wayne, came back Batman. It felt like.
Yeah.
And so I literally just got tired of the mediocre me. I was talented but lazy.
Right.
And so I just wanted that version to just go somewhere and just be done and come back as just a new person.
Right.
And I didn't even know I was coming back, so that whole story just kind of went crazy as well too. But It was just absolutely necessary for me to surpass my mediocre standards.
Mm-hmm. So let's take it back 2, 3, 4 years. Did you know that, this was not my final form? This is not my final Andre.
Ooh.
Did you really recognize this, or were you like kind of stuck in this is it kind of state?
My company is called Humble Genius for a very specific reason. And they say a lot of times the mantra you choose or the descriptor you choose is the opposite of who you are, and that's very true for me. I grew up, let's say, coddled. I grew up always being told I was talented, intelligent, confident, handsome. Like, since I can remember people seeing me, they treated me different. And eventually I treated myself different, like I was above something, right? 4 years ago, I was one of the most arrogant people on the planet. I didn't think I had to do any work. I thought that I could literally just be who I was and everything would fall in my lap. And for the most part, it did. And then life hits because you make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes, they stumble you and they give you an opportunity. They make you sit still for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so when those opportunities made me sit still, I had to think about, was this the final form? So like 4 years ago, I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
Then I got sat down for a minute, and it like stifled my mind enough for me to just start thinking, like, all right, do I want this to be my final form, even if it is? And so, like, looking back, I used to be embarrassed at the guy that I was, and now I realize that it was a foundation and a platform for the message that I currently push out every day.
Right. Is there a particular person that you can really put out there as this was a big help from the mindset perspective, or I saw, my dad or my mom or this famous person do this thing that really kind of helped this movement start?
Catalyst for the start.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say that for me, I think it was. I don't really know what the catalyst was for me. I think a lot of times what I saw was a lot of people I didn't want to be like. I think I constantly saw people who, so I went to school for clinical psychology. So human behavior that's my thing. Cognitive development, that's my area of study.
Right.
And so I started to be able to realize when people were lying about being happy, when people were lying about or just unsatisfied with life. And like, you can see people, they're wearing their clothes and they're happy, and then later on you see them kind of like fade off, and they're not satisfied. My parents, and I think our whole generation, I think I saw settle.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to settle. And so my inspiration became not getting to the end of life being at my final form. Like, 'cause what is it to be at your final form at like 24 and then get all the way to the end of life and you're like the same person?
Right.
I didn't feel comfortable with who I was enough to say that I could be this person forever.
Right.
I think I'm getting closer to that point, but at the end of the day, we're all constantly reborn. But to me, I can't really pick one person. I can say that it takes a village to raise a child truly, and that child will always live inside me. So I think every single day, whether it be a person on the street, a homeless person, you can learn from anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm constantly looking for the happiness or lack thereof in other people. And this is the example I use. 500 years ago, there were no cell phones, and when you saw a person, it was probably the first time within miles and miles. But if I walk past you, there should be one objective. I should be asking you, is it safe that way? You should be checking to see if it's safe that way. And sometimes it's just a head nod. And so for me, when I come upon people, no matter what walk of life, no matter where they come from, I'm wondering, is it safe that way?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty good that way.
Right.
It's better here, but it's okay that way.
Yep.
And so I look for every person that I meet to just figure out their lessons there, because we all have them. And they can either steer you to, through, or away from something.
Right.
And so I've learned to look at every single person as a pivotal moment where it's like, wow, I should go a different way, or maybe I should step it up. And so I can't really accredit one person. I can say my parents served as a foundation because that's obviously where I developed my mannerisms and the person that I was from the beginning.
Sure.
And then as I grow now, everybody, every single day is a compass.
Mm-hmm. It's 100% perspective. There's so many people who have been through so many things that, you can't see what someone has been through until you start to really understand them. And I heard it was Gary Vee. I heard him say a couple days ago. He was talking about how business is so much different than any other. For example, when someone comes in to work at a job, you can tell very quickly, or even in the interview, that they won't be fit, right? But when you go down the VC, give this group of 20 to 30-year-olds money, it takes 3 to 4 months to understand that they're shit, right? So, and I think that's with anyone. People bring their face value, and this goes down with social media too. I think people that say that social media is such a bad and negative thing, people don't understand that this kind of present a highlight reel or present only the good things on social media has been existing for eternity.
Yeah.
In 1980, and you go meet with a friend to go get coffee. You're not going to tell them that your life is terrible. You're going to tell them you're doing great. Everything is great, right?
Right.
You put this skin on to look a certain way for someone, and that hasn't changed in social media, except now it's being documented, and you're going to get called out on it when shit hits the fan.
That's a fact.
And I think that's really the difference. And I don't know. It's interesting, just like learning about people, and then comparing it to how they portray themselves, and like knowing that something. It's going to hit at some point, and it's not going to be good for them unless they're able to turn it around and be self-aware in that situation.
Yeah, there's like who you are, who you think you are, who people think you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ideal thing is for all of those entities or whatever to look the same in a way. And I think that's, I actually met a person a couple weeks ago, and this girl, I forget where we were at this event, she started like crying almost. And she was like, I'm sorry to cut you off, but like your conversation is too real for me. And I took that, it was alarming to me because it made me realize that I greet people without a mask. There are a lot of stories that I share with people about my life, about the struggles, about the things that I go through, about my relationship with my parents that sometimes I get on platforms and I'm eerie about sharing on the platform, but if you stop me on any given day in the street, we'll have a conversation about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I greet people with no mask because why?
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't want you to know a representative of me. You're then going to expect that when you come back, and that's exhausting.
Right.
And I can't remember what entity I gave you versus that person versus that person.
Yep.
I would rather just be the same person.
Mm-hmm.
I would rather just do the same thing. I just don't, it makes me uncomfortable to act in a certain way that's outside of who I really am.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the more time goes forward and people understand the power of being exactly who you are, which is tough because, we have people that judge you based upon that. But I think the more you do that, I think the more the lessons reveal themselves to you because they're being revealed to the actual you.
Right.
And the representative can't tell what the lesson is.
Right.
Doesn't even want to know.
Right.
The real you knows already and just needs to be reminded.
Yep. Exactly. All right, since we're getting short on time, I think it's time to wrap it up, and I want to give you the platform to plug what you need to plug. So what do you got going on in the coming weeks, months? I know you're flying out to South by, which is super exciting. Congrats on that. That's an amazing opportunity, and I think you can leverage a lot of things once you're down there, especially you.
I'm taking every business card that I own, and I might buy some extra. So yes, I'm going down to speak at Hustle House by Black and Brown Founders. They're hosting something, and I'll be hosting a lightning talk on Where's the Love, talking about how to love yourself, how to approach vulnerability and your gifts and downfalls in a holistic way that empowers you. My goal is to help everybody, like the cup should runneth over, and which means you should have so much for yourself that you can give to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And you only can do that if you approach yourself without a mask. So also shooting a documentary series on what it means to love yourself. As I said before, Where is the Love is something that's near and dear to me because it's, I know that we're all on our separate journeys. And as I went through my struggles and talked to people about my struggles, I realized that each and every single one of us that we walk past is going through something very similar. Mm-hmm. And all of our pain is relative. All of our backgrounds are relative. But they intertwine. That's really it for me as far as that. The South by Southwest, the documentary series. I have a book that'll be coming out in July on my birthday. Wise Words from a Decent Man. Mm-hmm. Kind of like a poetry quote compilation. And I'm really growing every day. So sometimes I switch it up and I have to like pivot, and that does give me anxiety because of the people watching that expect you to do something specific. But I'm learning to chase my dreams as they come.
Super exciting. With a beard like Harden and a mind like Einstein, Andre, I thank you. I thank you for joining me today, and it was certainly worth the trip down to Philly. So thank you much, Andre.
You're the man.